Women! What's the deal with them? What are they doing in the bathroom? Why are there toilets there even? What is the point of those? Look, my content is mainly consumed by guys. There's women also, it's not exclusively men, but it's overwhelmingly men. I talk a lot about men's issues, the sorts of problems that we face in society, because there is a dearth of people doing that in a constructive way, and I think that Andrew Tate and his imitators should not be given sole stage in this discourse. So you can watch all that. I have plenty of videos about what life is like as a man and why it can be super fucking hard. In this video, I want to talk about the experiences of women. I know, because I have seen it, that a lot of people in my audience sort of like struggle with understanding women, what it is they do, why they do what they do, and let's be serious, often why they keep getting rejected. Which, you know, there's nothing wrong with that motivation, I think. Like, physical intimacy and companionship, they're valid human needs. It's psychologically distressing not to have that in your life. We're social creatures. We don't like rejection. It makes us feel inadequate. There's a lot of bitterness out there too, a lack of empathy sometimes for the sorts of issues women face in society, much in the same way that, you know, many are oblivious to men's issues. I think the reasons are different, but it's there. And I kind of get why some people feel that way. I don't think that such emotions are evil, but they can lead to some pretty odd and ultimately evil rationalizations. I also find that when men are seeking to understand something, they're often met with some pretty vile and dehumanizing rhetoric by people who say that they don't have to be the ones to explain these things to them. And that's just true. I mean, that's true. Nobody owes you an explanation, but I will nonetheless try to give you one. Or, you know, rather a few. Will cover a lot of ground today, which doesn't mean we'll look at everything. There are plenty of facets of women's lives that shall remain mysterious to us today. We're not going to cover every woman's life experience. Video may seem long, but it's not that long. Women, if you are watching this, I'm trying to use my manness here to reach out to other men in this video. So some of the things I say and the arguments and explanations I pursue might sound weird to you. Please, let me cook. A lot of this discourse, in general, is framed like, as a man, you are somehow deficient or evil if you don't know something that was never explained to you. And I think that's stupid. Because it's not like women actually understand men very well either. They like to pretend that they do, much like there's a lot of chauvinistic guys out there who like to pretend that they understand women very well, but really they just know how to manipulate people. Some people have actually done that work, and I think that's more common among women than it is men, often out of necessity. Women learn a lot about toxic men early in their life, that men tend to learn about toxic women pretty late in their life. The need is greater, the risk is higher, and the sisterhood more supportive. This is gonna sound very funny, but I did actually talk to a lot of women to do research for this video, ask them what they feel many men don't get about them, right? What they would like a guy telling other guys from like a guy authority perspective. Because obviously I am in a place where I can communicate many of those ideas from a different position and with different language because I have a different life experience. I also talked to a lot of men, asked them what confused them about how women act and how they think. And among both of these groups, there were many transgender people who I find have a very unique insight into the different experience you make when you're treated by the world as a man and or woman. Because it really is ultimately about how you're treated based on how other people perceive you. And many, if not most people, behave differently to men and women. I think that's kind of like a very uncontroversial thing to say, that's a thing that most people do. Ultimately, one of the most basic and important points that I think is lost sometimes in this Discord is that women are not that different. I mean, men and women, they're not that different, but you're the guy, so the women are not that different. They're not aliens. They're human people. Everything they do makes sense to them in a way that can make sense to you, because the frame of reference is really very similar on like a cosmic scale. You can, in fact, understand women. It's possible. You can't understand every single woman because, you know, just like men, women have very different from each other and will have had different experience in life. The things I'm going to talk about today are common phenomena that shape women's thinking, but not every woman is exposed to them to the same extent or at all, or draws the same conclusions from them. I can give you some insight that I hope will help you understand the individual women in your life better, but ultimately we're talking about a vast demographic of billions of individuals with unique lives, experiences, and dispositions. You know, just like men. I don't have a universal key to the female mind, and anyone who tells you that they do is lying to you. You have to be the one who chooses what to take away from this video. We'll start off with something that I think most guys actually have a lot of common ground with. Women do not feel respected as people, and the reason for that is that they aren't. A lot of young guys struggle with understanding this because the discourse is often framed as though it's something uniquely female as an experience, but it's kind of a universal young man experience as well, that nobody respects you, especially older men. No one takes you seriously, everyone feels like they can give you unsolicited advice, and they do, sometimes very aggressively, because you're a young man and you're worthless. I remember very distinctly the first time I was taken seriously by an older guy without any sort of like weird comments or snide like personal attacks. I was at a locksmith to get a piece of jewelry fixed, and he just took my order. We had a moment of small talk, and he, like, did it. I even asked him some questions, and he explained it to me without any sort of resentment. I had to ask to be mansplained to. I paid, went home, I looked in the mirror, and I saw this thing right here, my beard. That's what did it. I've not been treated like a child since I've grown this thing out. People take me seriously now. And if you're a young man, this will happen to you eventually. Doesn't necessarily have to come with a beard. The thing is, to women, this does not happen. You can be an accomplished master of your craft, award-winning icon of your field, and men of all ages will explain basic and often incorrect things about your field to you and dismiss anything you have to say. And they'll do this knowing that you are an expert in whatever field you are an expert in, and while confidently not being an expert in that field themselves. This isn't the, you know about this too? Let me info dump at you about things you know, and then you info dump at me about things that I know, and we will connect neurodivergently. That is something that happens. I think sometimes women, like, mistake that for mansplaining, but it's definitely a real thing. This is full-on men, like, not taking you seriously because you're a woman. Like, you're trapped perpetually in a social status of being an unserious young man. Imagine, like, James Bond meeting whoever this film's Bond girl is, and her just commenting on how he's doing international man of mystery stuff wrong with, like, the shittiest and most basic gotcha commentary. Oh, like, why are you not wearing a fake mustache, huh? Just full-on belittling him, sniveling at his tiny expertise. Women experience this all the time. They need to constantly prove their expertise on everything to men. As a guy, you can wear a band shirt. As a woman, people will ask you to name a certain number of songs or albums of that band, right, before they endorse your choice of clothing and, like, allow you to wear the shirt of the band you're a fan of. I see a lot of men every day wearing NASA shirts and hoodies, and I guarantee you, a big portion of them thinks NASA is a clothing brand. Walk around with one of those as a woman and you will be interrogated about astronomy and the geopolitics of the mid-20th century. It's great if you want to study for a test, really. You don't need to impress a bitch with your superior knowledge. You need to let a bitch impress her superior knowledge upon you. You might learn something, and she'll certainly appreciate you treating her like a full human being. That's my dating tip for you right there. Sometimes when you, like, hit 50, you're taken seriously as a woman, in a professional sense. But that is very much not the rule, and it's usually dependent on you adopting a number of masculine traits, which can be difficult, not only because as a girl you tend to be raised to be quiet and demure, and it can take a lot of work to break that programming, but also because if you do break that mold and become more assertive in the way that men are expected to be assertive, you get judged a loudmouthed bitch, because a lot of men feel insecure when you claim these traits for yourself as a woman. And look, maybe a lot of guys are not like this. Maybe most men are not like this. But sometimes it just takes one dumb cunt to ruin your day. And as a man, you're just way less likely to run into one of those. Plus, you also haven't been told all your life that the only viable path for you is to stay in the kitchen and press out a couple babies to take care of. There are some differences in the type of disrespect you experience as a young man and as a woman throughout your whole life. What you experience as a young man tends to be more dehumanizing. It often involves some sort of deeply traumatic hazing or bullying, especially if you go into the trades. But really, this can happen to you anywhere. And you just have to take it because you're at the bottom of the totem pole, paying your dues, as they say. For women, it tends to be much more sexually objectifying. A lot of men love to be rude to women they find attractive for some reason, reducing them only to sexual characteristics, which we'll talk about more in a bit. It's also much more universal, right? When you're a young guy getting talked to about something, it's gonna be by someone who knows about that thing. As a woman, it can literally be anyone, no matter how much or how little they know, up to and including other women trying to get a leg up over you. This is why girl boss feminism is fucking stupid, by the way, and most women know that. They don't really like it either. It's just trying to emulate the worst traits of male business culture and grabbing everything for yourself while giving no thought or solidarity to anyone else. Imagine, for a moment, if once a month, for like 3 to 4 days roughly, you have a little gnome that punches you in the balls at random times throughout the day. He doesn't always hit nut, he doesn't always hit strong, but you can't predict it. And though you can guess pretty well when he will show up, you never know for sure. Sometimes you wake up and he's just there after you felt him coming for a few days, but sometimes he'll just be out at the supermarket, comes walking out of the dairy aisle, fists raised. That's kind of what it's like having your period. It can vary tremendously from woman to woman, and sometimes even period to period. There are some women who experience some mild abdominal pain about once a month, and then they bleed a little. And there's women who suffer a week of gut-wrenching agony, like they got rusty razor wires slicing around down there, and the amount of blood-flesh mixture coming out of them lends that mental image a lot of verisimilitude. Things can also get pretty complicated with like trans women and trans men depending on hormones and other medical procedures that are relevant. I am here mostly talking about cis women. And yes, the period is associated with a hormonal cycle that strongly affects women's mood. But little known fact, men also have such a hormonal cycle. We're just not that aware of it because there's no bleeding involved. It is by and large similar-ish in intensity, and the fact that you probably didn't know that should kind of tell you something. The thing that makes women irritable while on their periods is the pain. Because of course it does. If you had that kind of pain, you'd be irritable too. If your body had some sort of like injury that flared up every once in a while, sure, you might make some like good-hearted banter of it together every once in a while, but you wouldn't tease him with it and dismiss what he does and says based on the assumption that his pain is flaring up again. Maybe you'd even be a bit forgiving, but that's it. But aha, you say, this paired with the hormonal cycle means women cannot be trusted with making decisions during this time. And I mean, sure, but like women know this? Most of the people I know who have periods, they don't make big decisions during like those 2 to 4 days. Sometimes they have to, of course, you can't always avoid that, but then their regular experience with having periods and that hormonal cycle will make them very attuned to what is emotional and what is rational thinking, because they have experience with that kind of introspection. And you know who doesn't? A lot of men. And you know, I've talked about extensively, I've talked about how emotional introspection is one of those things that gets taken from you if you grow up as a guy, because that's how society treats men. But it should give us like a moment of pause. If men also have a hormonal cycle, men usually suck at introspection, and men are also often in pain, we men make stupid emotional decisions just as often as women do. We just like to, as a culture, pretend that those decisions were actually rational because, obviously, men are rational. I hope you can rationally see the error in the logic of this. It's a well-established psychological fact that most decisions you make are rationalized after the fact, so a lot of people assume their decisions are completely rational when they're actually entirely emotional. Have you ever been at a beach and started digging a hole? Even if you haven't, you probably know what happens, right? Other men show up and they start helping. They just start helping. Or at least they stand around and wordlessly cheer you on. At the end of it, you probably don't even know their names. But for the time that it took to dig that hole and enjoy it, you're brothers, united in a singular purpose, to diggy hole. This sort of alignment of the stars syzygy type situation is the closest thing men experience to any random day in the women's bathroom. Women look out for each other. They give each other advice, share information without expecting to profit. They will give complete strangers makeup and hygiene supplies, help someone they have never met before, share their time, comfort, and resources with each other. When a woman cries in the women's bathroom, or really anywhere, but especially in that sacred space, other women there will comfort her and lend support. Give like a big hug and tell them whatever it is they need to hear. Women, even total strangers, are always digging a hole. By default, unless there is reason to assume otherwise, women have a sort of camaraderie, a solidarity with each other that I think most men can't even properly conceptualize. Which makes sense if you look at the way society is constructed, right? Men are cut off from as many avenues of interpersonal intimacy as soon as possible in order to socially isolate them so that basic human connection can be used to control them. There is a reason why one of the few places where it is socially permissible for men to actually be close with each other are military and paramilitary organizations. Men would not go to murder and die if they weren't manipulated into it, but unfortunately one of the major pillars of patriarchal society is men murdering and dying. So what are you gonna do? I've made videos about this, the social isolation and how that is maligned. You can go see them. I'm talking about the sisterhood, because it confuses a lot of guys, and sometimes confuses women too, because they don't really know that men don't have this. You may have heard, like, women talk about this idea of the boys' club, which goes further than just, like, it's a male-dominated profession, which is common. Women talk about this, like, how men give each other boosts and favors and special help because they're men, and so their shared manliness leads to, like, solidarity somehow. Women do this out of solidarity all the time. So why wouldn't men do this as well, is the thought process. It just makes sense. It's such an obviously good thing to have in your life. And men are often confused by this, which either leads to them not saying anything, or saying something which will then, through the power of miscommunication, sound like they're dismissing the negative experience those women have made because they're women. Because again, men don't have anything like this sort of blanket solidarity. Men are taught to not be supportive of each other unless they're close friends. There are some exceptions, like when they're drunk, then it's okay occasionally to make the mistake of being close with strangers, provided you're ashamed of it after. That's a very important component. One wonders why so many men are drawn to alcoholism. Or when it comes to certain physical tasks, very mechanical stuff. Doesn't matter if you see a guy actually struggling, you offer a hand at least. And if you know your shit, you sometimes offer advice too, to spare the other guy the indignity of having to ask and looking incompetent. But crucially, there's always like a power dynamic thing involved. Talking about emotions, hopes, and dreams, like relationships, even with your closest friends, that's gonna be extremely rare. We're not gonna burden the people we value the most with our problems. In a perfect world, we're not even gonna be aware of what our problems are. Especially trans men are often shocked by this shit once they encounter it, and the fact that they keep transitioning anyway should probably be an indication of how painful dysphoria can be. I say all this to you guys to call it out, because you know that this is what it's like being a man, and I hope you can see a little of what it's like to be a woman socially. We should be doing this. There is great value in understanding women here. Every single woman in your life can probably teach you more about this particular thing than I can. And you should seek their advice. You should listen to what they have to say. Men should have emotional solidarity with each other in this way. Ideally, of course, everyone should, with everyone. Women are just living in the utopian future when it comes to this. We should be this giving with each other and understand that women do this, like, not to be against us men. I know a lot of you think that they're like conspiring to manipulate you. They're not witches. They're just women. They do this to be for each other, not against you. And I know a whole fucking lot of them would love to be able to be for men in this way as well, but it can be difficult because it takes a lot of investment for one woman to build this sort of intimacy with one man. It's like a lot of work to get there. And then when the man realizes how good that feels, she has to carry all of that emotional weight for him, as opposed to having that weight distributed across a social network of friends and friendly strangers. Fellas, you know there's women out there who blame you for their emotional world because they are themselves emotionally dysregulated, and they expect you to manage their emotions for them. You know the whole happy life bullshit, how toxic and exhausting that is? Women are very scared of this as well. This and the fact that many men express their feelings through violence, primarily. But we'll talk more about that soon. And also, it of course goes without saying that some women are horrible and mean. All women know women like that. But being in touch with your emotions and being supportive of one another is something that will make you much more resilient with these sorts of people. And it'll help you understand women better. Because there's a whole dimension of existence they navigate that most men are just numb to, because it was forbidden us. The Sisterhood has helped women free themselves from a lot of patriarchal thinking. It's certainly one of the factors why that liberation has happened a lot more with women. There is just not such a social mechanism for men, and I think we need to change that. I'm trying to change that right now. I think as a society we've gotten much better at allowing men this kind of intimacy, thanks to many men adopting a more feminist outlook. But I also have to give credit where it's due. Many non-feminist MRA types. I know some of y'all hate to hear this, but they're not all Andrew Tate. Let's talk about sex though, because I know a lot of you are here for that. Objectification is when a human being is reduced to something less than human, an object in the eyes of others. This is a pretty esoteric concept to a lot of people, I think, so I want to dig into that a little bit. We value objects for the quality of certain attributes they possess, and it's pretty much always a narrow set of them, defined by what we expect. A chair can be comfortable, it can be aesthetic, it can be sturdy, it can fit in with the decor around it. A sword can be sharp, well-balanced, cool-looking, famous, and storied. The value they hold is the value we ascribe to them. They don't have any inherent value, not even in the sense of all the materials and manufacturing costs, because those are also pieces of value we ascribe to them based on our personal perception, what we have and what we need. I might not care about the aesthetics of the chair or the storiedness of the sword, and that's okay. I don't need to. They are objects. They exist to serve my reality. I have no obligation to them. I take care of them so they will last me longer, or sometimes to fulfill the wishes of other people. I can reduce them to this because they are things. This doesn't mean that they don't have any value to me, that I don't cherish them, but the value they have is the value they have to me. But what if my sword had a personality? What if it could talk? What if it had interests, wishes, a history of emotional abuse? What if it didn't want to be used as a sword? Would we respect its wishes even though it would make for a really good sword? I actually think a lot of guys would say yes to this because that is its purpose, and you must fulfill your purpose whether you want to or not. Which is a fascinating insight into how men are socialized that I want to pick up on in a little bit. But a lot of guys would also say, no, actually, if the sword is an actual, genuine person, it is more than a sword. You have to respect the mind in it, which you wouldn't have to if it was just a sword. This is the crux of sexual objectification. On a social level, women as a whole are defined by their usefulness as eye candy, as holes that are good at getting a man to bust a nut. No matter what you may hear on TikTok, it is not finding someone physically attractive that is objectification. It is the act of limiting everything they are to that, making them entirely about looking good to you. There's a whole person in there with a life, a personality, as persons do, but that doesn't matter. Only how hot you find them counts. You can see this in all sorts of media where the only real purpose of the female character character is to be visually appealing and like a reward for the male main guy. Has she ever said anything interesting? Shit, you will have huge amounts of shots of whole gaggles of hot women, the only purpose of which is to be hot. That's it. That's all they are. There is never any attempt at giving them like motivations or personality. They only exist to be useful to satisfy the desires of male characters and viewers. Now, there is a big conversation to be had about how this can be very empowering for women. They get paid to be admired. Sometimes really, really enormous sums of money for being ultimately very little in the way of labor. But on a societal level, as a woman, if you don't want to do that because maybe you're not comfortable with it, or you have a different interest you'd like to be respected for, you're not gonna have an easy time of that. Or, you know, even a reasonably difficult time. When you grow up as a woman, the way the world treats you very strongly tells you that your sole purpose in life is to be physically attractive and give sexual gratification to men. And if you're happy to reduce yourself to that role, you'll be celebrated in the way we celebrate a good sword. But if you want to do something else, or God forbid, you're not physically attractive, you can never have any value in the lives of others. Your inherent value as a human being is stripped away. So there's a very strong pressure to coping yourself into being happy with being sexually objectified. Wear a mask, smile in public, cry in private. Grow bitter and resentful when the looks fade. This is the purpose that is set for you. And it is precisely that limitation that can feel so horrible. I think that there's a few reasons why men can have a very hard time empathizing with this. The first one is very simple. A lot of men just don't care. Empathy requires a lot of emotional labor, and our empathy gets amputated early in life. Kind of when we start to get taught the only value women provide to us is to get fucked and work around the house. But there are also a whole lot of men who do care and just don't understand. So I think the second reason is that men are extremely starved of positive attention, especially positive sexual attention. You know this. You know how horny you are and how you have no bitches. It's clouding your judgment, brother. I know that I'm trying to explain to someone who is dying of thirst that drowning is also an uncomfortable experience. Even if you can intellectually accept it, it's a different thing altogether to feel it. But that's how you have to think about this. You know this classic comic like this one right here of men being given copious compliments? It speaks to you, right? It speaks to me too. I understand being so deprived of love that I really feel like this would be a better world for me to live in sometimes. Not understanding why women would not want this, even though this is the world in which they get to live every day. But it's not, is the thing. The women in this comic seem to be making genuine compliments to these guys. Women appreciate genuine compliments too. They love them. But most of the time, this sort of stuff, and frankly, much more aggressive stuff, is said with like some sort of sexual expectation. Most men say these things to women because they want to fuck them. That's the reason why they say it. They are an attempt at utilizing women as sex objects. They're part of the objectification process. They're not actually about the women that are being complimented. Imagine if these women all expected you to fuck them, and also imagine if all of them were creepy and disgusting, because a lot of these are beautiful and kind, which is also not the reality of it. Imagine that they're stinky, smelly, hairy, and have bad breath. And if you didn't give them the response they want, they could get really fucking angry and just spontaneously decide to ruin your life forever. They probably won't. The overwhelming majority, even the rude ones, wouldn't even try. But they could. And the implied threat is always there. What's worse, if you do give them some sort of response that goes in the direction of what they want to hear in order to appease them, they might feel encouraged, actually. And they'll really feel entitled to having you. They'll come really close, and they will breathe their horrible breath onto your face. So you're really always walking a tightrope between keeping every single woman in your life happy enough that they won't be angry with you, but not so happy that they will try to take you by force. And you have to do this even with complete strangers. How do you think that would color your life? Because it's not like they want to hear you talk about the footy, or paradox map games. They just want to use you to make themselves nut, not giving a shit about your wants and needs in that process at all. And then they'll just discard you until they feel like using you again. In the meantime, they either ignore you completely, but also expect you to be there on demand, or you have to do chores for them. When they make a move on you, it's never about you. Always about them. They're just trying to push the right buttons to get something from you that you maybe don't even really want to give them, because you know you'll get nothing back. But wait, there's more, because if you can actually, see a woman you do like, you've been raised to believe it's inappropriate for you to try and make any sort of move on her. I reckon some of you can relate to that very directly. Especially if you are out there trying to fuck. You'll get a certain reputation, because more hideous and disgusting women are going to feel entitled to fucking you because, well, you're a slut, aren't you? You fuck everyone. And then they will get very seriously angry when you reject them, because it's not about who you want to fuck when you fuck a lot. You will be the one who gets judged for it. You will be seen as less of a person for liking sex. The exact thing that everyone wants to get from you. Your whole life, people will talk about how dirty and tarnished you are for liking sex. That's also something a lot of you guys can relate to. A lot of women out there would love to be a massive slut and fuck an insane number of different people, including you, perhaps. But they know that if they do, society is going to judge them so harshly, it might ruin their lives at any point in the future. This is a real true fact. I've seen it happen. And it's not like women as a whole love the distance they need to create in order to protect themselves from weird motherfuckers, right? They want to meet people too. Many of them are lonely. It's unfortunately the guys who will try to break through that shield very aggressively that are often the problem. The third major thing is a bit more psychoanalytical and has to do with the fact that masculinity idolizes objectification. It's a man's goal to become objectified, to be defined by what use he is to other people, or rather the system. It's honorable to be a tool that fulfills its purpose in society, to be a knight that serves his lord in battle, to destroy your health, to provide for your family. Many men who are in a really bad place see being a valued cog in the machine as like the ultimate goal to their existence. It's what they're about, what they're trying to achieve. Serving honor over reason, honor over the self, is a powerful and highly respected male archetype. The warrior kills and dies. That is his purpose. And I think a lot of men have that sort of objectification as the highest virtue mentality burned so deep in their minds, they cannot conceive of not walking that path when it is right there for you. This is not a self-respecting attitude you have there, though. It makes you be defined exclusively by other people. It erodes your sense of self. And feminist thought has helped women achieve a sense of self-respect that goes beyond that. They are in touch with their inner self, and they want that to be who they are. There are some pretty crucial differences in the way men seek objectification, the first and foremost of which is, as a man, you just have options. As a woman, you have, like, the one path. That's the path you're gonna walk. You could maybe also become a nun in certain times and places, but that's basically it. And it's not like that's a particularly glorious and unrestricted lifestyle. Men historically have also had very limited options, but they were never as limited as the options of women. And for the past, 150 odd years, where, in the industrialized world has become an increasingly free society, the options that men have actually increased by many orders of magnitude, while the options of women remain similarly limited. Think about it. For the longest time, when men of any station were finding, all sorts of purposes, women could still only be hot and then housewives with husbands who cheat on them with younger women. Of course they would grow resentful of that purpose. And it's not like today, in an age where you can, as a woman, pursue any kind of purpose, really, there isn't still massive pressure for you to be hot and then a housewife. Speaking of which, most women can get pregnant. Some women can't, some men can, but generally speaking, the concepts womanhood and pregnancy are closely related for good reasons. We all know this, we all understand this, but it's sometimes taken for granted to an extent where we don't really think about what it means. You could say that women's ability to get pregnant is the main reason for their oppression in patriarchal society. Patriarchy needs men to labor and destroy, and it needs women to be servants to those men and to make more of both. Having a kid, or even just being pregnant, can seriously ruin a woman's life. It can ruin a man's life too. I hope we all know how fucked up and biased family courts can be, but when you're a woman, the chances and ways in which it can ruin your life multiply. First of all, health. A pregnancy is really fucking taxing on the body. Like, it's not just a discomfort for those 9 months. It can seriously mess you up in the medium and long term if something goes wrong. And you'd be surprised how often something goes wrong. It's an extremely difficult thing to do and exhausting. You're doing that for like almost a whole year? And it ends with one of the most painful and life-threatening experiences modern women, experience in their lives. If you're lucky, you have a supportive partner or partners, family, friends, that'll help you with the endless complications and inconveniences you suffer while pregnant. Problems with your feet, your back, your mood, your digestion, everything. Many little pleasures in life just disappear. You can't eat those foods, you can't drink those drinks. So coping is harder for those 9 months as well. And once you're in there, you're kind of committed to an ordeal that you can't just stop. Once you're in it, you're in it. You cannot get off this ride, even if you have safe and unhindered access to abortions. Women do not get abortions lightheartedly. They can be dangerous and costly to your mental and physical health. All women are aware of this. None of them are under any illusions about these things. It's not a frivolous endeavor they embark on. It's something they do because they have to. Look, I'm not one of those people that places female bodily functions on some sort of sacred exaltation. I know for a fact there are ordeals that men can embark on that are just as hard and just as long and just as painful and just as taxing. If you're creative, you can come up with shit like that. There's women who choose to do this shit several times and who take a certain kind of joy in it because they're doing it out of love for something that doesn't even exist yet. If you're an artist or a dedicated craftsman, you can probably imagine what that feels like, being willing to suffer for the sake of creation. But what I think a lot of men don't understand is the immense pressure that is put on women to go through this immense ordeal, whether they want to or not. Such an ordeal is optional in the life of a man, and most men, I don't think, ever do anything like it. But it is expected of women. Even with all the progress we have made in the developed world, the systemic and social expectation that it is your duty, your purpose to have children, that you have somehow failed to exist as a human being if you don't, is mind-boggling if you consider how, when push comes to shove, women who don't want kids and are forced to have them anyway will ultimately be the ones holding the bag in that equation, if the father chooses to fuck off. And a lot of fathers do. They don't even have to leave for that. They can just not do any of the work associated with taking care of a child, which is a lot. It's a lot of work. Even in a committed relationship, men can get away with doing next to nothing. A lot of them don't. They try their best, but a lot of them do. And if they're unlucky, they'll get a reputation as a deadbeat dad, and, that's bad. But it's not nearly the level of social punishment you'd receive as a woman who neglects her children. She'll be left to have to invest decades of her life into that child she never actually wanted. The best years of her life, she's been raised to believe. It's an unspeakable sacrifice she is forced to make. And quite frankly, if the child is unwanted, it's not going to be good for the child either. For men, too, there is pressure to have kids, of course. Sometimes it can be pretty harsh, too, depending on your family and social context. But ultimately, the worst that happens to us is the implied slight of why are you not having kids? Are you not getting any pussy, you fucking loser? Which, it's kind of messed up. It's rude, but it's not even the same order of magnitude. Even in our society, if you disregard the constant pressure and narratives you're bombarded with from all sides constantly, all the time, life is riddled with traps for women that'll pull them into pregnancy and child-rearing against their will. Think of contraception, birth control, and how that always somehow ends up being women's responsibility, when it really shouldn't be. This may seem weird to you, but there are a lot of guys out there who feel like if they can get away with not wearing a rubber, and this includes using pressure and emotional manipulation, they just get to do that. And sure, women have more options for this for reasons of simple biology, right? Most of the plumbing to make babies, though it requires male and female components, is mostly in the female components. So if you want to do something that interrupts the process of conception, you have many more angles of attack there, medically speaking. If one doesn't work out, you can always go for another. The male body plan simply doesn't allow for that. You got condoms, you got a vasectomy, which can at times lead to messy complications, and that's it. But while you do see a lot of political effort to ban or limit access to the kinds of birth control women can use, you don't really see anyone trying to ban condoms or vasectomies. I'm sure some attempts have been made in some edge cases, but it's not a well-funded, serious, and sustained effort. In most of the world today, systemically and legally, it is not women's choice to get pregnant. It's a choice that's made for them. And even in our progressive, developed world, there are so many pressures and laws that do everything in their power to take that decision away from women. Shit, on most of the planet today, if a man forces himself on you and gets you pregnant against your explicit will and consent, not only will you be forced to go through the ordeal of pregnancy, the agony of birth, and the complete sacrifice of your remaining existence, but people will consider you responsible for it as well. But we'll talk about that later too. Women are hypergaming. Hypergamy. Look, I know it's hypergamy, but whenever I see that word, my mind always passes it as hypergamy. I think of women hypergaming, reaching a sunyata-like state while playing Farmville. But really, you know, females be out there selecting mates, and they're only selecting the alpha chads that are 5 meters tall and possess the treasures of El Dorado. That is at least the idea of hypergamy. The idea that the woman you like is out there seeking the absolute cream of the crop exclusively. Only the most gigachad guys with infinite wealth and penises the size of aubergines who will dominate her with sheer force of will, so she can completely submit to him. This is why incels think women do not actually have hobbies, by the way. If you're an incel, maybe this will help you reflect a little on that. They just pretend to have popular interests to attract males, because their entire existence to incels is about becoming a vessel for another man's will. Another man being the important bit here, because it's someone else, not you. Now, anyone who hasn't had their self-esteem crushed to dust and blown it into the wind by incel forums and the pressure of performative masculinity, this may sound like a weird fetish thing, but for a lot of young and hurting guys out there, these thoughts are actually a form of self-harm. But it must be said, women do this. Women are attracted to certain status qualities, especially money or predictors of wealth, like intellect, education, social status, more than men are. And a lot of very intelligent, educated, accomplished, and wealthy women are having a hard time out there because they cannot find a partner that is superior to them in some way. Or so it would seem on the surface. There's actually a messed up reason for this, and I guarantee you most women would prefer it weren't so. For the longest time, and by this I mean, 10,000 years-ish or so, in most societies that have existed on Earth, the only way, and I cannot stress enough about how this is the only way, to have a shot at a good or even decent life as a woman was to attach yourself to a man who had that, or was likely to one day have it. Social mobility hasn't been great for men either throughout history, but most of the time there was at least the possibility of making something of yourself, of catching a lucky break and leaning into it, of being recognized as a vassal of great value, favored by a lord wise enough to disregard your original station in life. You could always work hard, sacrifice, become extremely good at something, prove yourself, even if it was an unrealistic possibility, it was a possibility. And if you didn't make it this time, maybe you could get another chance. Most men have always had some level of control over their destiny, however minute, in patriarchal society. For women, this was not so. All of your value as a person was bound in your husband. He was the ultimate measure of your worth as a person, and the worth of men has always been measured in wealth and accomplishment. And there were no second chances, no do-overs a lot of the time. Even if you became a widow and somehow did get some form of like a second chance, you'd always be a widow. Is it then particularly surprising that women who, for the very understandable reason of being human beings, wanted respect and security in their lives, if they had any say or option at all, would hitch themselves only to a man they were as close to certain as possible could make it in the world? Obviously, this is much less so the case today, but as with any cultural meme that has functioned as a keystone of civilization for 10,000 years, its scars and echoes are still there. Frankly, the speed at which women have dissociated from this standard of measuring men is impressive, and it shows just how little it actually suits them to live in a society that measures men like that. Because while yes, certainly many women are out there, they're being gold diggers or have like completely unreasonable standards, the overwhelming majority of them really don't. And it's not exactly as if men were known for their low standards when it comes to women. What most women are looking for is someone they can trust and who will treat them well. And yeah, being funny, charismatic, intelligent, passionate, having shared interests, all of those things will make you more attractive. Because that's just how being attractive works, really. You men want a woman like that as well. Exact same traits. And if you hadn't been conditioned to think that if a woman makes more money than you, it means you're personally a failure, you wouldn't mind her being richer than you either. Imagine, if you will, a world in which people want romantic partners who cherish and value them. If you think most women are actually the status-seeking sociopath, it's because you've heard from that particular minority of women too much. They are pretty loud, but in a way, they are also telling you what your inner voice of self-hatred, the voice telling you that you are not man enough, wants you to hear. So their voices are amplified further in your mind. Some women are terrible and they bring nothing to the table because they feel like they shouldn't be expected to. But the moment you get off the internet, you find they're not actually very common. They are more common among younger women who have been fed this lie of getting swooped up by a perfect prince who will carry them through life. And coming to terms with the reality that this isn't going to happen is a journey they will have to go on. You cannot walk that road for them. And if you feel like you need to walk that road for them, you have a long road of your own to walk. Some of these women are actually going to get into some terrible situations because of pursuing this trad wife fantasy. There are guys out there who are like this, who want to dominate women completely and make them into a treasured personal assistant. The fantasy of domination, of course, being not about the total restriction of the self, but being able to relinquish control to someone you trust, so you don't have to worry and make decisions for a while, because you know they will make good decisions for you. This is a common fantasy for women, and really, honestly, if you think about it, it's a fantasy for a lot of men as well. You want an assertive woman who tells you what she wants. It's also the classic slut who knows what to do type sexual fantasy. Someone who will take those decisions away from you, give you space not to have to think and perform sexually all the time, take care of your needs. It's a very human thing to want. The problem is that the kinds of guys who want a trad wife are just not trustworthy, usually. They don't want a treasured assistant, they want an obedient slave. They don't want to have a relationship with a person, they want to own a robot that looks hot and aces the Turing test. Many of these women ultimately find themselves in deeply abusive situations with horrible sociopaths. They're not getting railed by Chad Thundercock, they're out there getting psychologically and physically abused in a socially sanctioned way with almost no recourse. They're crying in the shower and it's terrible. The problem is that because this idea of the patriarchal trad experience is still very strong in our society, there is often no avenue for escape. They are bound to these abusive men who treat them as less than trash with no resources or support network of their own, and often worried about the safety of their children. Part of the process of feminism has been for women to wake up from the trad wife propaganda, to tell them, actually, men who want that can be really fucking dangerous. Nobody's coming to save you. You need to save yourself and become self-sufficient. It's certainly up for debate how well this particular message and its nuance has penetrated into the zeitgeist, but it has had an effect, and I think overall a positive one. But of course, there is still the one big mechanism by which society tries to pressure women into these sorts of traditional, submissive relationships. My final and darkest topic for today, the one I reckon will be most controversial, fear. And thus, of course, I must warn you, we're about to discuss some pretty dark shit, and if you are sensitive to that sort of stuff, you might want to get your comfort blanket now. Women are scared. A lot of women are terrified, and they shouldn't be. Sometimes it can feel like they're not, and definitely there are women out there who really aren't scared or who aren't scared most of the time, but even they will engage in certain preparedness behaviors in order to protect themselves from the threat of men. Not all men, of course, not most men even, but there are monstrous men out there, men who do horrible shit, and the problem is they are really good at disguising themselves as decent men. A small number of perpetrators can create a huge number of victims. I am late to the bear man discourse because I always am. I like to sit, I think, I like to ponder, and really the thing that bothered me the most about it all was that I very rarely saw any two disagreeing people talk about the same thing. People were throwing around weird numbers with little knowledge, women were arguing that bear encounters are statistically less dangerous than man encounters, which is really just not true to the argument, and also they were really messing with statistics in a stupid way. Men were out there, like, arguing that men could protect you from bears, which is like, who do you think you are? Like, a bear would fuck you up. Everything was just steeped in this tiresome morass of simmering hatred and vitriol. Very few people were out there actually trying to understand each other. It was just a contest of saying the most dismissive and hurtful thing to random internet strangers. Which is unfortunately how this shit usually goes. The point of the man-bear thing is that the bear is dangerous. It really should be that, of course, you want to run into a man in the woods. But with the bear, you know you're dealing with a wild predatory animal. That's what a bear is. It's a dangerous, unpredictable creature. You know that it is dangerous and unpredictable, and that it is not going to pretend otherwise. This is not true about men. And I think a lot of men struggle with understanding this, because the group of people these monstrous men are best at fooling are their fellow men. Simply by nature of straight men don't fuck each other and rarely go into detail about their sexual conquests. Women spend an enormous amount of time thinking about whether or not any given man is dangerous. They have systems and protocols with each other. They ask around for opinions of other women to know whether or not a guy, nice though he may appear, will sexually assault them once he has the opportunity to get away with it. And let's be serious. If that's the consequence of a single misstep, shit. You'd err on the side of caution too, I'd hope. This is extremely mentally exhausting, of course. It's a lot of assessments and decisions you have to make that are associated with deeply negative emotions. So it shouldn't surprise us that this fear can become undifferentiated in people who choose just not to do that mental labor. It's easier to be prejudiced. Literally, it takes less mental energy, and you can do it just some of the time. Most women just assume that most men are dangerous when they just walk down the street, because they have a whole life to think about, and they can't constantly be making these considerations. I am aware that most of the women and people who were at some point in their lives seen as women in my circle are particularly vulnerable, because many of them are queer, neurodivergent, The whole deal. But every single one of them has had something in the vein of this happen to them, even if it's only very explicit and threatening sexual harassment. I'll be honest and say that I used to not believe the 1 in 5 statistic, and that was wishful thinking because I bear a lot of guilt for childhood abuse reasons, and I didn't want that to be true. But I've grown a lot older, more educated, and experienced in life, and at this point, honestly, I think the number is probably a lot higher, actually. Certainly when you include a wider range of experiences that still no one should have to suffer. And the worst part is that a lot of women never complain and never come forward, because the consequences for this can be dire. Even in this day and age where things have gotten so much better so very recently, women are routinely blamed for becoming victims of sexual harassment or assault. Yeah, but, what were you wearing? Were you leading him on, keeping him frustrated? Did you fight back enough to hurt him? Clearly you didn't fight back hard enough to stop him. A lot of men think no means yes, so just saying no isn't enough. Did you drink? Were you drinking? Yeah, of course that'll happen to you then. Men are beasts. They can't help themselves. It is shocking how quickly people jump to those sorts of questions. Men and women. These are very deeply ingrained ideas in a lot of people. The effect is to instill guilt in a victim. The men responsible are thus absolved of at least part of their responsibility, even though the decision to commit this utterly heinous crime was completely theirs. And honestly, you as a man can probably relate to this. We live in a pretty victim-blamey society. I don't know if you've ever been robbed or beaten up, but there's a good chance somebody felt it appropriate to say, well, you shouldn't have been walking in that part of town at night, or, yes, you were wearing the colors of their rival football team. They had just lost. Or why didn't you just fight them off? When it comes to sexual assault, of course, men are told that they should be happy it happened, which a lot of women get told also. Victim blaming is rarer for us, but that's what it feels like. It was never your fault that someone else decided to do you harm. But some of us internalize that sort of narrative to make ourselves feel like we had some agency in this thing that happened to us. Or to feel that this happens only to people who have made some sort of mistake that we can avoid. That the bad thing cannot happen to us because we do not deserve it. We haven't made that mistake. And thus, that those to whom it happens must have done something to be to blame. This sort of victim blaming for women who have been sexually assaulted is not an exception, but actually very common. It's an extremely traumatic experience to have thrown back at you. It makes you feel incredibly isolated, and this is exponentiated by the particular moral decrepitude of rape and sexual assault. Most crimes can have some element of honor to them. You rob someone, it's wrong, but maybe you needed the money because society dicked you, you need to feed your kids. You beat the shit out of someone, it's wrong, but maybe he was insulting your friends to whom you are loyal. You kill someone, it's wrong, but maybe he killed your little sister. Doesn't make these crimes any less wrong, but it adds an element of honor to them. There is no possible conceivable edge case scenario in which the crime of rape and sexual assault has any level of honor to it. You gain nothing from it. You avenge no one. You do not redeem a thing. It's kind of like animal cruelty. Imagine blaming the dog. Which is the crux, once again, isn't it? Because the dog is a dog. Powerless, not a human being, utterly helpless at the hands of whoever is hurting it. Society puts women in that inhuman position, takes away their humanity, and then still blames them for it. So really, they're less than the dog. They have to share the blame of an utterly irredeemable crime with the men who did that to them. Legally, it's very difficult to get recourse a lot of the time, and surprisingly few people are actually willing to stand by women in this. It's gotten much better. Women are no longer the literal property of their husbands, just figuratively in the eyes of many people, and there is much more of a culture of awareness and safety. Like, that shit changed rapidly over the past decade. But the perpetrators have adapted. Many of the old tactics still work too, though, because, well, the underlying power structures still exist. I've talked before in other videos about how men are groomed to be sexual predators from childhood, and a huge reason for that is the express purpose of keeping women afraid, because being afraid takes away a lot of your ability to do things, to be independent. It pressures you into choosing the kind of unhappy and laborious life of emotional abuse by the devil you know that is characteristic of trad wives. It's not the only mechanism, though. Did you know that as a guy, you're way more likely to become the victim of almost every type of violent crime, especially from strangers, just for being out at night? But are you scared to go out alone at night? Maybe you're wary sometimes in some situations, but you sure as shit are not as terrified as most of the women you probably know. You don't engage in nearly the same amount of preparedness behaviors, which by the way can form a suite of habits that is very detrimental to your mental health because it tells your body to be ready for danger all the time. Whatever wariness and discomfort you sometimes feel, for women it's amped up 1,000-fold because they're constantly being bombarded with warnings and alarms that everything out there is extremely dangerous. They should be anxious and afraid, and they should just stay in the safety of the home of their father or husband. To go out there and be independent is deadly. You can see this. Stories with female victims are hugely sensationalized. Any kind of random act of violence, really. And while that does reflect on the value we place on male life, it is also crucial to instilling women with fear of acting with independence. One of the most prevalent rape myths to this day, something that a huge number of people believe, is that being out is the type of setting where women are most likely to be sexually assaulted, when the truth is that it's most likely to happen with someone they know and perhaps even trust. But being with people you know is not independent, scoded behavior. It's not something that society tries to discourage women from. Most true crime, a genre marketed overwhelmingly to women, does this today. And it's not like women are just passive consumers of this brainwashing. They are not just vessels to be filled with another's mind. They engage in it. Telling each other scary stories is a habit that reinforces this. Even devoutly feminist women perpetrate fear of these patriarchal myths among their circles sometimes. Because patriarchy is smart and insidious, and a lot of people who sometimes uphold it do so involuntarily. That's how a lot of the darker aspects of culture work, unfortunately. They are, as in this case, often tied in with the good and important ones, because it's obviously a good thing for women to look out for each other's safety and share intelligence, because there is real danger for them out there. The easiest way of making someone afraid is to put an actual loaded gun in their face. Every single woman that you know at least knows someone who has been sexually assaulted. They know that this is a real thing that can happen to them. But at the same time, I am not particularly surprised that the most out of touch with reality women in the world, middle-class suburban white women in the United States of America, are also the ones most convinced that they have been marked for human trafficking because the wind blew a plastic bag onto their child-killing tank of an automobile in the Costco parking lot. They have been deceived. With this comes a warning for you fellas. Don't make this an argument with women. I'm serious. Don't tell them their fear is irrational when they're feeling it, because it's not really all that irrational. There are times and places to have these sorts of conversations, like right now, for instance. Don't bring it up to prove a point or make her feel small. Do not diminish the pain and the fear that she is feeling, no matter how rational you think you're being. Because first of all, you're not being rational right now. You're trying to impress a woman by minimizing her emotions because you're too scared to express your affection outright or listen to the things she has to say. In this very scenario, this just isn't how you help people with their anxieties. It makes them feel alone and even more scared. In many of my videos about men's issues, I talk about how women should make an effort to make men feel safe emotionally. I saw at some point a counter meme to the bear thing that was, would you rather be open about your feelings with a woman or a tree? And I thought it was more salient than it had any right to be. This whole thing needs to be a two-way street. Men, I ask you, Make women feel safe, even random ones. Ones that will never pay you back. I know you have been told the story of when you save the princess, she becomes yours. Don't expect that. That's not the point of this. Save her in spite of the fact that you will get nothing for it. Save her because she is a fellow human being in distress. Also, don't make women feel scared if you can avoid it. Obviously, you still have to exist, walk down roads, and ask for directions. I'm not asking you to cease to exist as a person, but I am going to share a few tips with you that maybe might help a little bit if you're trying to do this. Remember that you're always dealing with someone who doesn't know you're not secretly a huge piece of shit. And it's safer for them to assume that you are, through no fault of theirs or yours. You don't need to let yourself be disrespected. You don't need to just keep your distance from any and all women forever. I actually think that attitude is extremely detrimental to society, but you do want to be mindful of other people. This isn't a personal attack on you. They're just trying to stay safe. Don't stare at women. It's creepy and weird. You can look at people, of course. We're humans. We're hardwired to seek each other out and look at each other. Just keep it civil. You can even admire people. I think there are some ridiculous TikTok trends out there right now that say that you can never admire anyone. But there is a line when it really just becomes ogling and very uncomfortable. Don't move into strangers' personal space. I know crowds sometimes bunch up. Then, of course, it's fine. Not a great place to strike up a conversation. Maybe a good place for a little joke. In commiseration, nobody likes being cramped in. When you're talking to a woman, think about how you stand in relation to her. Could she easily get away from you if she wanted to? Are you blocking escape routes? Are you cutting her off from other people? A lot of men do this just absent-mindedly, but it can make some people feel really threatened. Don't be rude. I know this sounds stupid, but what I mean specifically here is don't try to demonstrate how mean and mighty you are. Don't condescend. Don't try and find a fault. Women don't even find that attractive. I don't know why men do this. Try to have a conversation with someone like they're a person. So actually take what they say seriously. Don't just try to prove your manliness. This includes catcalling. Most women really hate it. Giving compliments is fine. There's a difference. Everybody likes hearing compliments. The thing about catcalling is that it has the same sort of posturing behavior that we talked about earlier in the objectification part of the essay. Oh no, I called it an essay. It's not actually about complimenting a woman, but it's about announcing that you want to fuck her. If you want to give someone a compliment, don't expect a thank you or a phone number. You might get a smile, but it shouldn't be about that. Also, don't make a compliment about her ass or tits, even if you think they're great. I know there's a lot of great ones out there. Find something else, please. I beg you, just find something else. Take a no. If she says no, stop. If she makes an excuse to leave, maybe go to her friends, unless she invites you to come along, and if she's interested, she probably will, don't follow her. If she seems uncomfortable, just drop it. A lot of women are actually scared of telling men no outright because a lot of men will get super angry. You don't want to be that guy. Most of the time, rejection is nothing personal. It has to do with them and their preferences, not you. Good on you for having had the courage to talk to a woman and take that rejection with honor and integrity. If you're not sure, genuinely ask, is this situation making you uncomfortable? Maybe offer, hey, I wouldn't want that. Say the word, I will leave you alone. And then you actually have to do it. I know there is a small subset of women out there who want to reject men so they will pursue and conquer them. Those women will just have to adapt or remain lonely. In the interest of keeping everyone safe. You don't want a woman like that anyway. You want someone who clearly communicates her emotions to the best of her ability. Not someone who plays games with your heart. You're above that kind of disrespect. When you see a woman who is uncomfortable in a situation with a guy, or a guy that's being terrible, say something if you feel up to it. Especially if the guy in question is someone you know. Linger if it's a lonely situation, so she's not completely alone with this guy. A lot of genuine predators will be deterred by that. Don't try to talk to her after though. Predators know what they're doing is wrong. So oftentimes, just making it known that you have an eye on the situation will deter them. In spite of what some people may say, you do not actually have a responsibility to put yourself in danger. You know this. The threshold that you need to hit for a guy to start beating the shit out of you is way lower if you're a guy. Sometimes this will make you the target of their anger. But people are also more willing to interfere in a fight between men than a sexual harassment situation. Also, crucially, make sure she's actually uncomfortable. Sometimes this is obvious, sometimes not. Don't just conjure up a situation like this in your mind because you want to be seen as a hero in order to win some woman's affection. I understand the impulse. Everybody wants to be a hero. If you have these basic things in mind, you should be better than most. I know some of them can be a bit ambiguous and difficult. I'm not expecting you to be perfect. I just want you to try. I believe strongly that nobody needs to answer for the crimes of their gender, and this is not punishment. It's just a few thoughts with which I hope to make the lives of a lot of people a lot easier, including yourself. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities. Consider buying some of my merchandise right here, or my short story collection. And in that spirit, it's been a bit. I had a little health kerfuffle, and university really blew up in my face. Some of you may know I went back to uni for learning purposes. I'm not even pursuing the particular degree I'm in. I just like to learn, and it's helping me in my professional life. However, I am going to tread even more slowly with that. I love the aspect of learning a bunch of new stuff, but I gotta be careful with the stress. I had a proper burnout a few years ago. I need to avoid that. This YouTube thing will continue to be my priority. There was a point where I could have finished this video sooner, like 2 or 3 weeks sooner, but I would have rushed it. And I didn't want to do that with a topic like this. I don't like doing that in general. I'm not sure I've ever done it. Probably have at some point. And also, quite frankly, it was hard sometimes, emotionally, to research and talk about this stuff. And see you around, cunts.